Hello and welcome back to the My First Marathon podcast, where usually we're interviewing runners in all stages of their running careers about their first marathon experiences, but today we're back with another Wednesday mini episode. Today we're going to be talking about how to choose your first marathon. Do you go for a world major? Do you go for just a bigger race, a local hometown race? What are the options? We're going to weigh the pros and cons today, so let's get into it. All right, so you've decided that you want to run your first marathon, but you're not sure what race you want to run. If you don't know me, hi, my name is Taylor, and I have ran 3 marathons, training for my 4th marathon right now, and I feel like I've had a nice variety of bigger races, medium-sized races, and my 4th marathon coming up at the end of the year is going to be a world major. So obviously I haven't ran that world major yet, but I did go back and listen to some episodes of people who have ran world majors to get kind of the pros and cons of having that big experience for your first race. But let's start with what I know. Let's start with the local races, the medium-sized races, that kind of thing. So my first marathon that I ever ran was the Wilmington Marathon in Wilmington, North Carolina, and if you're not familiar with North Carolina, Wilmington is a coastal city. I would say that along the coast it's the biggest city, so it wasn't a tiny race by any means. I've had some people on the show who have told stories of like starting at a start line with 20 people, so it's not that small. Actually, let me look up how many runners were actually at that race for comparison. Okay, so in 2024 when I ran that race, there was about 4,300 people that ran the half marathon and the marathon. So it wasn't a small race by any means, but it also wasn't massive. The second marathon that I ran was very similar. I ran the City of Oaks Marathon in Raleigh, North Carolina, so a bigger city for sure. It's not a coastal town, it's like an actual city in Raleigh. And that race had about 7,600 runners, so it was bigger for sure. I would say that like the overall feel felt about the same though. And then my third marathon that I just ran in April was the Eugene Marathon, and that was definitely the biggest race that I've ran so far. It was also in Tracktown, USA. That is a big reason. Besides Eugene being really close to my hometown, that was a big reason why I wanted to run it, because it is a runner city. So like just the energy and the people was amazing. But that one had about 14,000 runners, so pretty much double to what I ran when I ran the City of Oaks Marathon. And now for Wilmington and City of Oaks, some of the pros and cons that I will say about running those races are, for one, they are big enough that there was really decent like crowd support and good water stations. I think for your first marathon, researching how many water stations there are is a good thing to look at, because I have heard horror stories of people showing up to their first marathon and realizing that it was a little bit of a smaller race than they anticipated. And even some marathons have like volunteers that come out and do aid stations, so they're not strategically put, they're not backed by any sort of like medical advice of how often you should be fueling or anything like that. It truly is just volunteers out there setting up a table and passing out water out of the kindness of their hearts. So these like medium-sized races like City of Oaks, like Wilmington, those are going to have like a nice balance between the aid stations and also not being a massive race where the logistics can get a little bit crazy. The other pro to running these like smaller races is the expos. The expos can get crazy. Even when I went to Eugene, I went at kind of a peak time, and I felt like it was pretty chaotic in there when we were trying to get our packet pickups and like do all of the gear stuff and shop around. Obviously you want to shop around and get some merch when you go to a marathon. I felt like the City of Oaks Marathon and the Wilmington Marathon, those like small to medium sized races, had a really nice expo experience as well. We were in and out, got our bibs, got our things, that was it. The last pro that I'll say for running these races, these like smaller to medium sized races, is just like ease of race morning, getting to sleep in your own bed, hopefully. Being able to pick a hotel that's kind of close to the start line if you're not sleeping in your own bed, because the race logistics, it's not like 55,000 people trying to book the same hotel, it's like 3,000 people trying to book the same hotel. Much better opportunity to find something that logistically makes more sense. This also gives you more control over the food that you're eating, the like pre-morning ritual that you have, like all of those things that you would typically do on a race morning. You have a lot more control if you're running a local race. The cons of these local races though, I think the big one is crowd support. A lot of these local races will have a really amazing start line and a really amazing finish line, but not all of them will have really awesome crowd support during the race. And a lot of that isn't just the crowds not coming out. Some of these races have routes that, they're working with the cities that they have. So they have these routes that go in certain places that are not easy for spectators to get to. Like I remember in Wilmington specifically, there was a large chunk of the race where we were just running over an overpass because it was point to point from the ocean to like their downtown. The only way to get from the ocean to downtown was to go over an overpass. So I get it. I don't think there was anything they could have done different there, but there weren't any crowds on that overpass because it was just impossible to get to. Versus a race like Eugene, that's bigger, and Eugene had crowd support pretty much throughout. It still had that same problem. I think every marathon is going to have that same issue where there's going to be little turnaround points or little parks that you have to run through just for the sake of the route where there's not going to be great crowd support unless you're running like World Major, which we'll talk about. But For Eugene, there was a lot more consistent crowd support throughout, and you could tell it being a track city and also it just being a bigger race. Like the race organizers were really thoughtful about where they were putting the course. So you did a lot of like running past in a different direction of a direction that you started the race in so that you get that same crowd support out and back. So just a lot of really smart decisions like that can make it feel like it's a much better atmosphere. A little bit of a side tip, if you're somebody that loves running with people during training, so you've, joined a running group, you are joining like a coaching group, you go to run club, whatever it might be, if you enjoy being around people, you might enjoy having a little bit more crowd support because you're used to feeding off the energy of the people around you. So if you're planning on running your marathon solo, but you've been training with a group, I would definitely look into a course that has like a reputation for having more crowd support. Other thing I'll say about crowd support is you can strategically put your people, your spectators, your fans and friends and family in places that you want them easier at these local races. Like I said, obviously I haven't ran Chicago, but just thinking about where to have my dad set up so that he can take pictures of us so we can see him is just, it's a whole mess in itself trying to figure out where I'm going to put him. So these local races are much easier because you can look at the race map. If it's in a city that you live in, you're much more familiar with the city and where they can park and things like that. And you can put your people more strategically where you know that you'll need them. The last con that I'll say before we talk about world majors for these local races is the time cutoffs. The time cutoffs have always kind of been a problem with these local races. I think that there's some local organizations that could do better for sure, but a lot of these things are out of their hands, so let's talk about that a little bit. If you are a middle of the pack, back of the pack runner, something that you have to take into consideration for your first marathon is time cutoff. You should have an estimated time of when you think you'll finish and give yourself some cushion because you never know what's going to go wrong on race day, right? So, but knowing your cutoff time can also help you dictate the type of race that you want to participate in for your first marathon. A lot of times these race organizations have really aggressive cutoffs, and I get in some cases why they do that. It's usually a resource thing. They can't have volunteers on staff for a certain amount of time. Sometimes it's even like the city is preventing them from keeping roads open for a specific amount of time. Sometimes it's the amount of like fueling that they have and water stations that they have. So it can come down to things that are out of the race organization's hands. I won't throw any shade on any specific ones, but I've ran a couple of races, half marathons in my local area here in North Carolina. Definitely could have had longer cutoff times and chose not to. So there are some race organizations out there that frankly, they just need to do better. But taking into consideration your time cutoff is definitely going to be something that can help you narrow down your race. And the big pull, besides the excitement of the world major that draws a lot of like middle of the pack, back of the pack runners in, is the cutoff times are usually a little bit more generous in some of these bigger races because they have the resources and the money and all of that to support that. Let's talk about world majors. I love when people come on the show and tell their world majors stories. All it does is get me fired up to run my own. I'm running Chicago this year. I don't have any plans to run New York or anything like that in the near future, but I've always wanted to because of the way that people talk about these races. And the number one thing that they talk about in terms of pull to run these races is the amount of love and support you get just from everybody, from the crowd, from your friends and family, from the people at home. There's a whole lot of energy around this race, and the crowd support, from what I've heard, is unmatched. So if you, like we were saying, if you are somebody that thrives off of energy, you know you're going to need that extra push, or you just want the adrenaline of having a bunch of people screaming your name, a world major might be the better choice for you. Another pro for this one is it's a once in a lifetime experience, right? So I think most people end up running a marathon, catch the bug, and will end up running more marathons. But if you truly think this is going to be a one and done thing for you, if you're going to run your first marathon and that's going to be it, which totally fine, running a world major is a really cool way to have your first marathon and go out with a bang, right? It's a once in a lifetime experience. There's a lot of memorabilia that you can get to help remember the experience, like the merch that they have that's specific to the year and specific to the race. The medal, obviously, you can get different like shadow boxes to put your bib and your medal and your pictures in, and professional race photos. Oh my gosh, that's a huge pull. You do have to pay for them for world majors, but that's a huge pull for people, is to get really cool professional photos in these really amazing cities. So it's a once in a lifetime experience, and if this is going to be a one and done thing for you, or you're not certain you're going to train for another marathon, it might be a cool way to go out. Now let's talk about the cons of these races. So obviously they have a longer cutoff time, but because the world majors are so popular, it's really difficult to get into some of them. Like I know some people who've been trying to get into Tokyo for years and can't get in. I know that Chicago's a little bit easier to get into than some of the other ones. So is London. New York is getting trickier and trickier to get into. Boston's like a freaking nightmare to get into. So it varies from race to race, but generally it's going to be trickier to get into the race. if you're not familiar with how world majors work, you usually have two options on how to get into a race. You can either raise money for charity or you can pull lottery for that race. For Chicago, for example, my mom and I both put in for lottery. She ended up pulling lottery. I did not, so I'm raising money for charity. And that can be a whole other thing on top of your training, that if, you're training for your first marathon and also trying to fundraise and do all these things for charity, like, it's for a great cause. So if you have a specific cause that's near and dear to your heart, or a specific reason that you're running the marathon that you want to also fundraise for, great. That's amazing. I'm having a fantastic time fundraising, but for some, that might just be some added pressure on top of the race that you don't need, at least for your first one. So just keep that in mind, that you could put in for lottery, but you might not get into the race the same way that you can get into some of these local races. And then money. Money, I think, is the biggest con to running your first world major. And I can speak from experience now, because the costs of the race add up quickly. Like I said, I'm running Chicago. Just to put my credit card down to enter the lottery, I was already on the hook for $300 just to register to get my bib. On top of that, like I said, I'm fundraising for the American Cancer Society. I have links in all of my bios on all of my social medias if you are interested in donating. I'm like $300 from my goal, so quick plug there. But I'm fundraising for Chicago for the American Cancer Society, and my fundraising goal is $2,100. Now, thankfully, people have been kind and I've been able to get really close to my goal, but if I don't end up raising the full $2,100, I'm on the hook for the rest of that money. I've committed to donating that amount of money. So let's say between now and October, I get 0 donations. On top of the $300 that I already spent for the registration, I'm going to have to pay the additional $300 to round out my fundraising goal as well. So that's something to keep in mind, is that's $600. Like that can add up really quickly. And that's not including logistics, hotel, flights, anything like that. So I understand that it might not be as accessible to every single runner to run something like a world major, but there are some fundraising things that you could do for yourself to fundraise to get into it. A lot of local running stores and local brewery run clubs and things like that love to sponsor marathon runners to help them get to their first marathon or get to marathons beyond that. So if you're interested and you want to run it enough, and you want to try to raise some money for it for yourself, for your own race entry, I've heard of other organizations that do things like that. So definitely look into your local community and see if there's any businesses that are sponsoring marathon runners. So just to break it down into a few things to take into consideration when you're considering your first marathon location, I would definitely look at crowd support first. Do you need it, right? That's what I would look into. If you've been training by yourself, maybe you could get away with a smaller race with a little bit less crowd support. But if you're somebody that's been training with a group and training with people and you enjoy that, you probably want to find somewhere with good crowd support. It's going to pull you through those tough moments that you're not expecting. It's I don't know. It's fun to have strangers cheer for you. Number 2, race location. If you are somebody who gets stressed out by logistics, if it stresses you out to have to travel to a event, if you feel like you want your own food and drinks and things like that just at your disposal, at your hands, then I would definitely recommend doing something more local. And like you saw with my experience, there was a big range of local races that I could choose from. I had that smaller Wilmington one that still felt like a pretty big race, and then I had the City of Oaks one that was like almost 2,000 runners more, maybe 3,000 runners more, and that also felt like a really cool experience, but I didn't have to travel very far. Wilmington was less than a 2-hour drive for me. So pick a local race if you feel like those race logistics are going to add some stress on race day that you don't need. And then lastly, just consider the type of experience that you want to have. If you want to have that once in a lifetime experience, I would say run a world major, right? That's going to be something that you cross off the bucket list, something that you look back on and you can, consider it one of the best experiences of your life. So if you are looking to have that experience for your first marathon, go for it. If you have the means to do it, do it. And if you don't have the means to do it and you're passionate enough about it, lean on your community, look into your running community locally to you, and see if there's any resources out there to get you there. Because, runners are a very positive community. We all want to see each other succeed. And I guarantee you're going to find somebody that's willing to support you along the way. That's it. Thank you so much for tuning into another mini episode. I hope this was helpful in choosing your first marathon location. And if you want to follow along for more updates, make sure you're following us on Instagram and TikTok at myfirstmarathonpod. I have free resources that go along with most of these mini episodes on my website as well. That's myfirstmarathon.co/resources. So thank you so much again, and we'll see you on the next one.